Hello, hello, and welcome to CogX today. Destination Automation is the title. Now, self-driving vehicles, like any tech, will always have for and against points. I think it's imperative that we triangulate that such that we can look at the criticisms, we can look at the dangers, but we then work that debate back toward, I suppose, the societal merits. So in this panel, what we'll be doing today is addressing the advantages, not simply in terms of the tech, but also the environmental and the economic and the, I think, physiological as well, building opportunity. Now, in the interest of balance and fairness, and dare one say a third way of the sort of Clinton, Schroeder, Blair variety, we integrate concerns and challenges that are going to be presented by the very notion of a self-driving vehicle. The science and tech on the table, they're all state of the art, but the messages apply to all age ranges, all abilities and socio-economic groups. We'll cover some of the common logical barriers to the developments. And at the same time, what we're hoping to do is drive through an acceleration of positive insight and possibility. So we're all on a journey in this new era of automation. Society can escape the gridlock of any limitations. We need to define those differentiated destinations, and we just have to plan our routes carefully and avoid a breakdown. So rather than getting left behind, let's start now, onwards. So I'm joined first with a jump start from Robert Sugar. Robert, are you into the room?
Hello, James. Yes.
So Robert, would you like to introduce yourself and talk about?
Yes, please. Yeah, so I'm Robert Sugar, and I'm the CEO of Urban Hawk. Urban Hawk is into basically, well, anything data-driven, so we make things smarter, and that has to do a lot with automation and, an interesting topic, including which is the autonomous vehicles, as that technology is really around the corner. So, yeah, there's a sharp difference between America, for example, and Europe. As in America, the road system is more simple. It's really straight, wide roads, so it's really easier to operate these things. However, in Europe, we have wider challenges with cities where the road infrastructure has been built, like in the 15th, 16th century, perhaps. So it's definitely more challenging for these vehicles, so perhaps we'll see them first on motorways, but they are definitely around the corner. So this is something which is coming, not 10 years, not 20 years, but actually gradually, they will be rolled out. Many interesting questions, whether these, do we need them? Do we like them? A lot of people have a lot of concerns, which is understandable. There's not much anyone can do, to be honest, because the technology is rolling out, so that's inevitable. It's like with, if you look back in history, it's like with electricity or, just the automobile. So when these things are in the air, it's happening anyway. But then it's radically going to change lives and the world as we know it. So a more interesting question next to safety regarding these vehicles and efficiency is really the wider impact, and that's something we would like to talk about today. I guess, I presume the other panelists, will add a lot in detail. That how actually transport. So once we have these self-driving cars on the roads, then how is that going to change our lives? Like how many people will own cars? What about parking? Will these vehicles will they be constantly in the traffic, for example? Do they need to park at all? What about housing? What about commuting? So loads of interesting questions. However, the number one is still safety. And if we think about it, actually, and compare all the autonomous and all the automation to the manual human piloting, then actually one thing quickly becomes clear. The nearest comparison is probably the aviation industry. where actually, yeah, flights are almost automated. A lot of people don't know that, but actually, well, these planes could land on their own at the moment, and yeah, they take off. So the pilots have really minimal interaction, and yeah, we don't think about it. We don't bother. We feel safe, and if we look at the aviation industry, passenger air flights, well, it's one of the, or potentially the most secure way to travel. Yeah, I might guess that it's even more secure than actually walking. Because, yeah, if you walk, you could get hit by something. Yeah, but if you sit on an aircraft, you're pretty safe. So the same is true for all automated systems. Humans do a good job with piloting. However, we are not ideal pilots. There are numerous actually studies, and anyone can Google them in labs. Yeah, any trials, field trials, whatnot, where actually you can see that the human mind can be easily overloaded. And the problem is that once you overload with too much data, too much info, then it ignores certain parts. And the first thing it drops is actually the visual info, because the visual info, whatever we see, whatever we perceive through vision, is the most loading, the heaviest among all the input, and that really leads to accidents and error. So our eyes focus on the subject, but our mind just doesn't perceive. There's no memory, nothing. So if you think about it, then it's machines should be more efficient and should be safer. So I am probably finishing right here because we're running out of time. Okay. So I'm definitely putting my vote next to automation, and I'm looking forward to see the self-driving kind of revolution.
Thank you, Robert. Everybody hear me? Back to me? Okay, so that's a very positive note on which to start, but once again aware of some of the concerns, limitations. So the next guest is Benedict, and I mean, there is a real balance here in the sense that we're looking at an economist point of view, but also from the field. So some of the micro and macro benefits that can occur. Rwanda will get mentioned, Taiwan, and so on. Benedict is an economist with as a head of science and innovation at the Institute Global, which he can tell you all about as part of his segment coming up. So, Benedict, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, and thank you for the reference to the third way in the original introduction. It's not often the most in vogue politics at the moment, so glad to see you're keeping that sort of flame alive. I agree with a lot with what Robert just said, and I think the key point on this issue, in some ways, is it's really a question of where, how, and where this is happening, and if you look at the sort of regulatory and policy landscape around the world. And Sebastian will be able to sort of speak to this, I'm sure, very well as well. It's like Germany already has an act on automated driving. The UK has already, got legislation in this and thinking about advanced lane keeping systems, for example, to have them on the motorways. Dubai has committed to 25% of journeys being automated by 2030, which is obviously huge, hugely ambitious target. And Honda, even sort of this last week, has announced they will mass produce level 3 autonomous vehicles. So the pace of change is really, really happening quite deeply. And Robert alluded to some of these questions around safety and liability. The issues around the trolley problem, for example, are very well discussed. And even seen some worries about autonomous vehicles being, used as drug mules. And so there's quite a wide public debate that needs to happen on this issue. And I still think probably where a lot of the public is today is that, EVs will never happen. And I think we've obviously been through some early sort of hype cycle stuff, but, it's really maturing as a technology. And I think probably if you thought to think of the sequence of this, I think in the first instance, we're likely to see sort of a disruption to sort of transportation and haulage and to sort of what, Robert talked about the ease of where, the roads in America, it's, motorways, for example, where a lot of transportation and haulage does, I mean, they're not, the most hardest to navigate in technical terms. So I think, there's probably the first point without being disruptive, but then that also then has the knock-on effects from, the policy perspective of jobs, and complete disruption of the market and industries going. The second is probably within the public, I think, is that, ultimately user experience is always going to win out. And, and I think sometimes people think this is always like an ultimate and sort of absolute position that, it's all autonomous vehicles or nothing. Whereas I think, you'll probably end up seeing some form of, mixture where some people can own a level 1 type, car still. Some people have a level 3, others will have, level 5. But, it's all going to be sort of a mixture of this. But then, and I think sort of, again, Robert touched on some of this, is the second order impacts kind of like very, very profound, I think. A large part of our infrastructure is already designed around the car today, and it won't need to be. Cars are parked 95% of the time. They take up about 20% of, parking takes up about 20% of land usage within cities. You have quite sort of profound ramifications just in that sort of design perspective, but then the knock-on effects of that, could mean, points on housing, which, Robert again raised, and, complete repurposing of land, and also public transport doesn't necessarily need to act in the same way if you have fully on-demand autonomous vehicles. Do we have to live in sort of a city that's connected if we're happy to sit in a, autonomous vehicle for an hour watching Netflix, on our phone or whatever, outside in suburbia, which probably is also a question that's sort of been raised within COVID and the way that people can work remotely. It kind of, it augments some of these trends that are already happening. And then the sort of situation that's been the broader potential changes around infrastructure. Again, Sebastian sort of knows the German stuff well, but there's companies like Lilium who are doing fully electronic air mobility network, which potentially removes the need for large infrastructure projects. Who we've had in the UK is a long-running saga. You have questions about tunnels not being necessary. There are quite as I say, profound ramifications. But then, James, you sort of mentioned some of the points around sort of Taiwan and Rwanda, and I think just to sort of locate this in some of the other global parts of the discussion, I think why those two are quite interesting is sort of Rwanda is one country that has sort of taken digital transformation very, very important, very, very important to sort of their progress, and they have this concept around leapfrog technology, and sort of they have drones that deliver blood because they don't have the traditional infrastructure network that you do, and automated vehicles aren't just going to be cars; they're going to be a whole other raft of vehicles in the future, which will be deployed for these kind of purposes. And then just to sort of locate them, as you referenced Taiwan, I think this is actually kind of how we think about the political debates that we have, and why Taiwan is very interesting, and why we sort of take a look at this from the Institute's perspective, is that there's a participatory democracy and sort of consensus building model, which has meant that it's been incredibly effective at dealing with COVID. And I think, as we have some of these sort of frontier technologies being deployed within society, we need to rethink the sort of the contract, both in the sort of the social sense, but in also the sort of the way in which we do democracy. And we need to think quite carefully about how, the government engages with its citizens around these technologies in the broader sense, not just within autonomous vehicles.
Anything further on that? We haven't got any questions coming in or so on, but we could go on. We could go on and on. But I think that's an excellent overview. So, do we move on? On to Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Sebastian, or do you speak for yourself? I mean, it's. I think the introduction is actually part of how you address the topic. Thanks to Benedict, by the way. Especially the third wave note is very heartening. Thank you so much. Sebastian, go for it.
Yeah.
You can introduce yourself, because I don't think I could do you justice, frankly.
Thanks for the kind of words. My name is Sebastian Hofer. I'm from Germany, working in the field of mobility for quite a while now, mostly focusing on public transport, mobility as a service, and also micromobility as a field of expertise that I'm bringing into this round. I'm working as a freelance consultant nowadays. I'm hosting a podcast called Freifahrt, which is mostly in German, unfortunately, and I'm writing and helping cities and public transport to move to the next level of the mobility ecosystems. Regarding autonomous transport, I would like to raise the question of why this is a technology that we need and who's benefiting from it. Because in my point of view, autonomous driving is something that has been introduced from a highly technical motivated standpoint, because it's possible and because obviously for shared services it reduces the cost that you need to run these services. Any kinds of ride hailing and on-demand services obviously have the highest part for the cost that you need to run these services is the personnel, is the staff to drive the cars. So I get the point that it should be something to get off the books. But then on the other part, the big question for privately owned vehicles is getting or is aiming directly towards what Benedict said, and it's the space, it's the urban space. You mentioned 20% of urban space is allocated for parking space, and I don't know the absolute numbers, but I know that, for example, a driving car needs 140 square meters if you go by 50 kilometers per hour. So there's lots of space that one car consumes, and autonomous driving, autonomous technology could help to reduce the amount of space that you obviously need because of the shorter distances between cars. Obviously, it also has lots of potential to increase efficiency, what you do on your daily commute or getting anywhere. But I would like to get back to the big issue of space, because I think the biggest issue that we have in urban landscapes and urban environments is air quality and space. And autonomous driving, especially if you allow privately owned cars driving around without a driver and picking you up anywhere, so the ubiquity coming along with it is something that I would like to raise my concerns very intensively, actually. So I think I'm going to stop here for now.
Okay, all right. Well, some of that will probably be covered in the polls, I think, because I think some of the concerns that you've raised are concerns that anybody watching will bring up. What you must do, however, I mean, I have put it in the link, plug your podcast, because it's an excellent podcast for that very kind of layman's access to science, the awareness of the awareness. Just have a quick word about that, Sebastian. You did ask for it, so I'm giving it here.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'm trying to raise awareness for the field of a new mobility culture, and by culture I mean all the myths, all the rules, all the way how we get along from A to B in every day, which is sort of in our genes by now, because we don't really reflect on it on a daily basis, obviously, anymore. And I would like to raise the question, if this is what we do, like the space that we allocate, the emissions that we accept, also the deaths that we accept based on privately owned cars, is something that we still want to accept in the future. And therefore, I do this podcast, and some of the episodes are in English. Luckily, most of them are in German. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out again, James.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much, Sebastian. And anybody reading, there are details, of course, in the links provided if you want the links to the podcast and so on. Okay, so to the next guest, Nikki. Nikki is a leading physiotherapist, and the angle here is to get the more clinical and I think pastoral, but also the kind of the almost commercialized sense of what a driver feels versus what the injuries are that can arise from normal driving, versus I suppose what automated transport could do in both senses, both perhaps solving a lot of problems, but once again we're not avoiding the problems that it could still cause. So we're going to get the personal, clinical, and pastoral perspective of a great professional here. So over to you, Nikki. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Okay, so I really want to look at two major concepts both ways, which is freedom and safety. So obviously our main concern if we're going to be passengers in an automated vehicle is our safety, if we're choosing that over driving ourselves. And having considered it from a clinical perspective, I'm really looking at all the user groups that are limited from using a vehicle because of their physical disabilities. So an example of that would be if somebody recently fractured their arm or their leg, they were not able to actually drive a car. This would be a great opportunity to still continue accessing work environments, accessing social, leisure, health appointments, and also pre-existing conditions. So people who've got back pain, who need to do a long journey, if you're sitting and actually driving yourself, that's quite uncomfortable for long periods. If you have the option of an automated vehicle, this would be a good option for you, and obviously you could also work at the same time. One of the other guests mentioned about parking. There's also the ability to actually park a car. Obviously, you've got to be able to have good range of movement in your neck and your spine to be able to do that. And those people who do have pre-existing injuries may struggle to do this, and actually potentially can hit other cars and cause accidents. So the fact that the vehicle is actually able to do that for you, I think is quite a good thing. And we're already seeing that, aren't we, with self-parking vehicles. They're already bringing that in. Vision impairment is something else to consider. Obviously, people with sight disabilities, driving's out for them, whereas if they've got somebody, so the option of going to an automated vehicle, they're still able to get from A to B without that being a limiting factor. And if we look at the population itself, as we're getting older, we're still retaining more and more of our independence. As far as I'm aware, I think you still have to redo your driving test when you get to a certain age. So this is another thing that won't be a restriction, I would have thought, if you've got the option to travel through an automated vehicle. Your age is no longer going to be a restriction to getting in a car and getting from A to B. Dangers. I'm not quite sure at the moment how these vehicles actually work with regards to stopping quickly. I've treated probably 4,000 whiplash injuries. That's quite a considerable caseload. And obviously, rapid deceleration causes quite significant trauma to the neck or the cervical spine. I'm hoping that these automated vehicles, if we are going to have vehicles driving closer together, are still going to be able to stop in a safe fashion and not actually put the users at any form of risk, especially as they're not so primed to the dangers, because I would have thought they would be busy on a phone or reading materials, which is different if you're obviously a passenger or a driver in the car. You're much more aware of what's going on around you. Freedom of enjoyment. So from a personal perspective, I like driving my car. It's fun. I get a lot of pleasure from driving my vehicle, which for me, I would see getting into an automated vehicle much more of convenience, getting from A to B. I also like driving to places where I wouldn't have a particular end destination. So if I'm going touring or exploring, I want the freedom to just turn down any lanes and explore. And I'm not sure how an automated vehicle is actually going to cope with that. Obviously, we're going to look at motorways first. It's going to be easier to plan journeys, but I would still want the freedom of being able to get in a car and go anywhere I wanted to. I feel that perhaps it's an organic process at the moment, and we're already seeing more and more things coming into our cars. So it's more of a subtle metamorphosis to this. We've got self-parking going on already. We've got lane managements in cars. You're getting warning signs if you're going out of your lanes. Headlights that you can put onto settings so that they dip automatically without you having to have an awareness of whether or not you're going to blind somebody who's coming around the corner. Obviously, the most simple things, we've obviously got automatic gears and self-parking. So I would have imagined that whilst there might be a little bit of fear for the population to transfer into automated vehicles, that if we just slowly put more and more automations into the cars that we're currently driving, it might become a more seamless process.
Interesting.
My thoughts, and
once again comes back to that idea of triangulation, a third way in the technological sense. You know, forgive me for overusing that term. It simply means, to my mind anyway, a sort of a compromise whereby something doesn't happen overnight. You initiate a process that allows for a step back, but you don't stop taking the step forward. And I think that kind of common sense is missing from the narrative about technology. And I think there needs to be more of it. And I think as perhaps the political without getting political, perhaps as the nature of political dialogue changes in the years ahead, I think we may see a resurgent nature of that. So thank you so much, Nikki. It was, as you know, a layperson or technical expert, absolutely fascinating. And yeah, just really, really, really a pleasure. Now, I hope you're all going to stay for the final 5 minutes, because it is at this point that our questions and answers and polls come through. Is that correct? Do we have anything coming through? Were we being watched at all? We do have 5 minutes. I did budget it.
Yeah, so actually I was going through the polls myself, just to see actually what the questions were and what the answers. Right. Yeah, there's an interesting one. Would you still want to own a vehicle if mobile fleets are there for you all 24/7? That's a very interesting question. So I'm not sure what to say. So perhaps yes, perhaps not. Well, it probably wouldn't make much sense to own a car in the same fashion as we do today. Because, well, if you look at alternative examples, what's the closest we have today? Probably kind of shared, maybe a taxi company or kind of a shared ride service providers, which still takes a couple of minutes actually to pick you up. However, if most of the cars were actually autonomous and they are out in the traffic, like a swarm of potential actual vehicles which could pick you up like any moment, then yeah, we could presume that these times will radically drop. So if I had an option that a car would pick me up like in under a minute or half a minute or something like that, then perhaps it doesn't make sense anymore to own a car. On the other hand, though, what if you own a car? If you own a car, you, can use it when you need it, but when you don't need it, you could still let it out back to the traffic, for example, which brings us to really uncharted territories. So for a ride share, will there be any charges? Will there be commercial models? Can I enjoy these commercial models myself? So what if I send back my car into the swarm of potential vehicles delivering other people, and I just rent my vehicle out to ride sharing? Then I can make some income without actually doing anything, because my car is basically doing the job. So very interesting changes, very interesting kind of wider impact, which we don't even know yet what to think about them, and difficult to foresee actually.
But the point is,
that was a good one. Yeah, that was that poll.
People are interested, and people fill it out, and people have views, and I think that's the key thing. If we've got people thinking about it, then that's a half an hour well spent. Sebastian, any views on those poll numbers coming in?
Building on what Robert just said, again, I would also ask the question, like, owning a car versus using a car in the future is pretty much the same thing in the end, because what you want to do is, the job that you buy is not a vehicle. The job that you buy, or the vehicle that you hire for the job that you have, aka getting from A to B, it shouldn't depend on whether you own something or not. And I would suppose that owning a vehicle and being in charge for maintaining it, paying for insurance and whatnot, is too much hassle in the future for private individuals to be wanting to make, I don't know, like $50 a month of it because you rent it out and give it into a fleet. I would rather go to the model of public transport and the idea of public provision, because mobility in the end is public provision, is a basic need, and therefore, similar to energy or water, getting from A to B should be something where you just pay for the specific trip, be it an autonomous car, a train, a bicycle, or actually just walking.
Excellent. So once again, yep. And winding up, almost 15 seconds. Benedict, any last words?
Oh, in 10 seconds, well, I'd say yes. Yeah.
James Murphy, Director at Urban Hawk. I forgot to introduce myself, I think. Robert Sugar, Director at Urban Hawk. Nikki Pickering, physiotherapist. Benedict, the head of tech, I suppose, for want of a better term, at Institute Global with Tony Blair's Institute. And Sebastian, the future of tech-based podcasting. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining.
Goodbye.
Goodbye now.
Our pleasure. Goodbye.